Thanks for joining us. This is Ed Kranich with the Connecticut Green Bank, and this is our quarterly informational stakeholder webinar. Next slide. Okay, so our agenda for today will be sector updates with Bryan Garcia, the President and CEO of the Green Bank, financial innovation with our finance team, Bert Hunter, Laura Fidel, and Diego Hencho. And we will finish off with other news with Bryan Garcia. And just as a reminder, we will be recording this webinar, and we will send out a copy of it next week. So with that, I'll go to Bryan Garcia with these sector updates for infrastructure.
All right, great. Thank you, Ed. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with Bert, Laura, and Diego for our quarterly stakeholder webinar. Why don't we kick it off with providing an update on what's happening in our infrastructure programs. Next slide. So this is a slide that we typically show that displays the progress of our residential solar investment program. This is not the California duck curve, though some of you may see some familiarities there. This is a diagram that shows the amount of clean energy deployed in the residential space over time by our fiscal year. So this isn't a calendar year, this is by our fiscal year through June 30th of every calendar year. So a couple of things happening here, really demonstrating not only the local trend in Connecticut with what's happening on the third-party ownership model, but more importantly, what's happening nationally. So if you look at what's happened in fiscal year 2017, we see about a 30% reduction, 20 to 30% reduction in terms of deployment in this sector. We've had several large national players who are working through their business models deal with that, and in some cases may have been retracting from Connecticut. So this is pretty typical, we think, for what's happening across the country as those third-party ownership models work to figure out their various business models. Next slide. So we are making progress. Go ahead and hit it once more. We are making progress in terms of deploying residential solar across the income classes. We've been focused since December of 2014 along the lines of ensuring that less than 100% area median income is a focus of ours. We're making progress. Hit it. Go ahead and hit the button once more. So when we focused on this back in 2014, you can see that at the low area median income census classes, we needed 10 times more solar PV deployment in order to be equivalent to non-LMI markets. We're now at about 3 times, so that is progress, but we still have a lot of work to do in order to ensure that residential rooftop solar is available to everybody across the state of Connecticut. We're also looking at here based on households. So you see that number, tracked households, about 1.35 million households. We're taking a look at some new numbers that looks at actually owner-occupied households. So this also includes households that are rented. So we think that as we take a look at this number, it might show a different picture in terms of some of the progress we're making in the lower income census classes. But overall, we feel really good about what's happening. A lot more to do in this area. All right, so with regards to our progress and targets for fiscal year 2017, so I just mentioned that our fiscal year just ended. For all of you who know, we have an annual budget and target setting process with our board of directors. We've just gone through that in our May and June board meetings to set the fiscal year 2017 budget and targets. And what you're looking at here is how well we did with regards to the infrastructure sector programs for fiscal year 2017. We came out of the year with very high targets. You can see $300 million in capital deployed as a target, over 65 megawatts of deployment with nearly 6,400 projects. We also, midway through the fiscal year, have a conversation with our board around how well we're doing on progress to targets and what's happening in the marketplace. And as you can see, back in January of this year, we revised those targets to reflect what we were seeing with regards to national third-party ownership models retrenching in Connecticut, trying to figure out what their broader business models were. And then you see the year end. So overall, probably 75% of our targets were hit in terms of capital deployed, deployment of clean energy, and the number of projects supported. So this is an area where we've missed our targets broadly, but again, there are other forces at play that are external to Connecticut. But one of the things that we're looking at and we're seeing is that the local contractor market is demonstrating resilience, which is to say that if you look at the local contractors, they're continuing to gradually grow their business. And the objective of the residential solar investment program is a sustained, orderly development policy objective, which means that these local installers continue to manage and grow their business, and we're seeing that. So we're paying a lot of attention to this and hoping to see on an annual basis now going forward anywhere between 30 to 40 megawatts of residential solar PV being deployed in Connecticut. All right, let's go to residential. Great. One more. All right, so we are making a really good headway on the Smarty Loan. This was our biggest year so far with the Smarty Loan, closing over $5.5 million worth of projects. Our decline rate has reduced. That's great. We're seeing it at an all-time low of 17%. We financed over $20 million of projects through the Smarty Loan. And for those of you who don't know, this is a program, a partnership with our local community banks and credit unions to get them to lend unsecured, affordable into the residential solar, or the residential clean energy improvement market to support the state's comprehensive energy strategy. We've now got 6 local lenders who are reviewing applications that have less than a 580 FICO score. So that's great. We're starting to see them broaden the availability and access to capital. And we provide, for those on the webinar, a second loss guarantee. So our focus is to help provide some support to the local lenders in the event that there are defaults in the portfolio, but we want them to take the first 1.5% of losses, and we will take the next 7% of losses, inclusive of some of the low FICO score applicants. We're now seeing several lenders go out to 15 and 20 years, which is great. The Smarty Loan did have 5, 7, 10, and 12-year terms. And now we've got several of the lenders who are willing to go out to 15 and 20-year terms, which is very, very important, right? If we're thinking about how to deliver positive cash flow to homeowners who want to pay less on their debt service than what they're achieving in terms of energy savings from larger clean energy improvements, that may be things like solar PV with air source heat pumps, with more efficient weatherization and the like. So we're seeing really good uptake of the Smarty program and a development by the local lenders to provide consumers with more options. We do have a special offer now in the marketplace, a 0.99% offer. We're trying to encourage the development of new industries, the renewable heating and cooling industry, for example. Connecticut has a climate change plan and a strategy in development. And one of the things that's identified is the need to help households move from thermal loads that are being met by heating oil to renewable heating and cooling. So we're offering a special offer to lower interest rates to encourage more contractors to work with customers to help that, as well as other things that are consistent with the comprehensive energy strategy in terms of natural gas conversions and the like. We've had really good performance in the Smarty program. We've had 2 defaults to date of the nearly 1,200 projects closed. We've got 3 delinquencies, all within the 30-day delinquency period. So overall, we're feeling really good about the Smarty Loan program. Okay, next slide. So multifamily. So this program really starts off with benchmarking. We've got about 240,000 multifamily units in the state of Connecticut. About 150,000 of those are low-income units. We benchmarked about 25,000 of those low-income multifamily units. Our goal here is to help improve the knowledge base of the owners of those buildings about its energy consumption, with the hope that they would then be more inclined to pursue clean energy improvements to their properties. We offer a pre-development loan through the Navigator and Sherpa loan. This is intended to get these projects through the early stage of development, from things like energy audits to design services, even including green charrettes. The Sherpa loan, for example, helps us also move those projects beyond those stage and into more long-term term loan financing for major construction. And we're seeing our term loans start to pick up as well. We've closed about nearly $20 million of lending into our multifamily term loans and are leveraging private investment into that as well. All right, let's go. So this is where we stand at the end of the fiscal year in our residential sector programs. So here's a sector where we have overperformed to targets. You can see here that the team is doing very well using limited public funds to mobilize and attract more private investment, which is leading to more clean energy being deployed. So the team's feeling really good about the Smarty Loan having turned a corner. We're feeling really good about the Posigen product of a solar lease and an energy efficiency ESA product for the low to moderate income market doing well. I believe Posigen is now our fastest growing solar company in the state and quickly becoming one of the top 5 to 10 solar installers in Connecticut over the period of our program. In our line of multifamily products, you know, it's taken a lot of time, a lot of effort of our team with all of our partners to understand this marketplace and to build programs, to develop programs and products, and to help make inroads. And we're now starting to see the benefits of that work and effort. All right, so let's move it to commercial, industrial, and institutional. Next slide. So CPACE is our flagship product here. We just crossed the $100 million mark in terms of closed financing, which is great. We've got over 160 projects now financed through CPACE. Let's go one more slide. We are still inviting cities and towns to come on board and enable CPACE financing to your local businesses. So you see here we've got 128 cities and towns who have agreed to support the benefit assessment of CPACE. So we still got about 30 to 40 more towns left to reach. So if your town isn't on here yet, reach out to us and we'll work with you to enable that to happen. And, you know, as we've always talked about, our goal is to move towards utilizing more private capital. And you're seeing that here in this graphic. This is actually a calendar year graphic, not a fiscal year graphic. So as we deploy more benefit assessments through CPACE, we will see that number continue to grow in 2017. We think the target there, the range is going to be somewhere between probably 80 to 90% private capital in the 2017 year. So again, trying to utilize our limited public funds to mobilize more private investment. And that's happening through our partnership with Hannon Armstrong. That's happening with other capital lenders in the market like Greenworks Lending and Clean Fund, and a number of others who want to now come into Connecticut to use the CPACE benefit assessment to provide capital for properties that want to make green energy improvements. Okay, let's go to the next slide, I think. Yep, so this is the wrap-up of the fiscal year for our CI&I program. So we're at about 80 to 90% of the overall goals being achieved in the CI&I sector. I think one of the biggest points here is that we've been working very closely with the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, the Attorney General, and the Connecticut State College University System to help them deploy more solar PV on the rooftops of campuses to lower their energy costs. So we figured out a PPA, a power purchase agreement structure, to be able to support solar PV on Connecticut's state colleges and universities. And it's our hope that we'll be able to build from there to develop more financing programs around, not only colleges and universities, but what the state can do in terms of deploying renewable energy as well as energy efficiency through its Lead by Example program. So I think that is the recap of how our program sectors did for fiscal year 2017. I am now excited to introduce our finance team led by Bert Hunter. He's going to be joined by Laura Fidel and Diego Henschel, who are going to take us through a couple of really innovative things that they're working on. All right, Bert.
Great. Thank you, BG. And I'm going to immediately turn over the presentation at this point in time to Laura Fidel. She's Senior Manager on the finance team. Laura?
Thanks, Bert. So in terms of financial innovation, we wanted to share a few of our recent transactions with everyone. The first being a green bond that we've recently issued. I'll give a bit of background first before getting into the actual details of the transaction. But basically, green bonds are bonds that are issued specifically for the purpose of funding green or sustainable activities. You can see from the graph in this slide that the actual issuance of green bonds has been growing exponentially in recent years. It's estimated that by the end of 2017, around 340 billion of green bonds will have been issued by nearly 350 separate entities globally. There's a variety of different methodologies and guidelines that sort of define what a green bond actually is, or it can be used to verify the greenness of these bonds. And just to name a few examples, these include the Green Bond Principles, the Climate Bond Standards, and Moody's Green Bond Assessment, which is essentially a rating that you can get on a green bond. Next slide. In terms of the bonds that we've recently issued, they are CREBs, or Clean Renewable Energy Bonds. And these are bonds that are allocated by the IRS to public sector energy projects. This is, the public sector can't actually make use of the federal investment tax credit, given the lack of tax liability to public sector entities. So this helps public sector entities meet financial returns on renewable energy projects. So in this specific transaction, we received a $3 million allocation of CREBs, which we used to finance a 193 kilowatt hydro turbine in Connecticut. The type of turbine is called an Archimedes, which is a technology that's been widely used in Europe, but this is actually the first instance of it being used in the U.S. What it is really is it's basically a screw, and the flow of water turns the screw, which in turn powers a generator. The project is unique in that we've employed a relatively complex structure and have integrated a variety of renewable energy focused mechanisms available to us, and this includes Connecticut's ZREC and virtual net metering programs. We also have a power purchase agreement in place with the city of Meriden to purchase the electricity generated from our hydro screw. And I believe we have a quick video that we want to show that just kind of gives a bit more detail and highlights some of the features of the screw to help visualize the project.
For energy anymore. So we come up with something better than have the dam right next to the dam. Looking at little building until that chute would be the future for energy in New England. I mentioned that original approach to the country. Well, sort of. And then over Bob and Meriden, they're bringing out the big guns, or in this case, the big screw. And this little house next to the dam could be the newest, oldest invention. Nobody knew about the Archimedes screw generator as a source of renewable energy. The screw takes water from the pond and lowers it slowly. As it turns, the weight of the water is converted into electricity. And it goes down from the screw, and the screw is turning, and there's a weight of water sitting in the screw. That's what makes it the water pumps out the bottom, and goes back into the room. Now you're thinking, wow, what's power supply. It produces about 1 million kilowatt hours a year. That's about enough energy to provide electricity for 160 homes annually. All for one stroke of energy that was otherwise going to waste. Basically, for a screw that's turned for 2,000 years, this is the first one in the U.S. turning for electricity. And both for energy sources in America's industrial age are now once again open for business. We can take that legacy, which is thousands of pounds, and start getting powerful again. And if you're worried about the fish you hand over pond, so it's fish getting treated. When you get into it, leaves in the fall, there's these big pockets of water. They right down the machine, no harm done. You know, like 6 flags of fish, I guess. You gotta love that analogy. Why haven't 6 flags come up with this for right yet? This is the first one. There's over 100 of them in the area.
Okay, thanks for that. I mentioned it was a relatively complex structure. And I'm going to turn it over to our CIO, Bert, just to explain a bit more in detail what this involves.
Thanks, Laura. That was a great video, by the way. That was a great story, and kind of shows you why we're so excited about this project here at the Green Bank. But as far as the structure is concerned, any structure involving tax credits can get complicated, and the Meriden transaction is no exception, as you can tell by this diagram. But before just pointing to some of the highlights that you see on the screen there, just want to point out that the developer did try to finance the project with local banks. We actually, at the Green Bank, encourage developers to seek out private capital as a first option, and then if there's a gap, we'll step in. And that was kind of the case here, because the proposals end up being a bit limited. They came up with the bank came up with too little capital. The interest rate was quite expensive, probably in the 7% or so range. And the maturity was limited as well, which meant that the debt service, the funds that the developer would have to pay on an annual basis would be quite high and would be out of balance with the revenues that they'd recognize under, say, the ZREC and the Power Purchase Agreement. So these challenges really forced the finance team to get creative. We knew about the CREBS program that the Treasury is offering, and we also knew that Bank of America is very experienced in these structures, as well as has sustainable investment goals. We further were aware of the fact that they had access to a special interest rate buy-down program for energy production facilities, but at the same time, this program, or rather this project, was unique. It would only had an allocation of $3 million from the U.S. Treasury, so that meant the bond size was going to be $3 million. Bank of America, as you can imagine, being a very major financial institution, is used to dealing with larger financial commitments. It's a new technology, and so we had to get the bank comfortable with that. So we really put all of the policy mechanisms available through Connecticut's energy policy, as well as the statutory provisions available to the Green Bank, to come up with a structure that actually resulted in successful financing for the Archimedes screw that Laura described. We used in the lower right-hand corner, you will see that the state of Connecticut made available to us a portion of the Special Capital Reserve Fund mechanism that's provided to us under statute. So we used that to enhance the repayment capability under the structure. And as far as that structure is concerned, you'll see the green box in the middle there, lower middle. CREDS requires a state or state authority to own the project assets. So the Green Bank took ownership of the assets upon completion from New England Hydropower, which you see at the bottom there. But in order to divorce ourselves from a lot of the project risks, such as compliance with Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and deep compliance issues, all of these facilities, generally speaking, throughout the United States are subject to FERC regulation as well as some state oversight. Those are matters that we really did not want to be involved with. We wanted to just be involved with the financing. So upon acquisition of the project, we immediately leased back the project to the developer, who will own and maintain the project throughout the next 20, 30, and 40 years of the project's expected life. And as Laura mentioned, this project takes advantage of the virtual net metering program. So while the electricity you will see is being supplied by New England Hydropower to Eversource, we're actually receiving power purchase agreement revenue from actually New England Hydropower, and indirectly the Green Bank is receiving that revenue from the city of Meriden under a power purchase agreement. That is then routed through the virtual net metering program by giving the city of Meriden credits on their electric bill. So they effectively get the value of the clean energy being generated through the Archimedes screw in their city, and it's only made possible through all of the policy mechanisms that Governor Malloy and the legislature enacted over the last several years. So other than that, the structure with a typical bond structure and a trustee that collects all of the revenues and holds all the security for the benefit of the bond purchaser, which in this case was Bank of America, are quite typical. But that's how we were able to put the financing together for this project. Laura?
Great. Next slide. Just given all the work we've done in that structure that we've set up, we are quite eager to replicate this strategy of the project. There's still about $150 million left in a federal CREBS allocation availability. We're quite keen to get a bit more of that allocated to some new projects. We're thinking to potentially replicate this initial Archimedes screw project with other screws around the state. So we've been working with the developer to identify other sites within Connecticut. As well, there's a few other sites in the New England region generally that are being explored as well. So not likely with the Green Bank. We'd be helping other financial partners get comfortable with the technology outside of the state. We're also looking to expand our CREBS strategy to other technologies, so we could easily pair CREBS bond allocation with solar PV or wind within the state. It's worth noting, though, that the CREBS are not actually applicable to fuel cells. With that in mind, I'm actually going to turn the speaker over to Bryan to discuss the other innovations we've been undertaking in the area of electric vehicles.
Great. Thank you, Laura. So now we're going to transition a little bit from run-of-the-river hydro through the Archimedes screw and going back a little bit in history, and we're going to be talking about electric vehicles. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So one of the things that is defined by clean energy in our statutory definition is the Connecticut Green Bank has the ability to support alternative fuel vehicles and associated infrastructure, including electric vehicles, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, and the like. So as we start to develop strategies to apply the Green Bank model into the sector, we're very much looking at infrastructure and vehicles as we're going to go into in just a second. But to provide some historical context, Colonel Albert Pope was an entrepreneur here in the state of Connecticut who in the late 1800s licensed European bicycle technology and manufactured the Columbia bicycle. He manufactured hundreds of thousands of bicycles, sold them, became very, very wealthy. He was the leader of the Open Roads movement, which led to lobbying Hartford as well as the federal government for our highways. It was important that bicycles have flat roadways for people to get from one place to another. But what he also became interested in was electric vehicles. So not a lot of people know that the city of Hartford manufactured the first 500 electric vehicles. Colonel Pope employed over 10,000 people in downtown Hartford. The city was undergoing a renaissance in terms of interchangeable parts, and the colonel was a part of that. A young Henry Ford often frequented Hartford and met with the colonel. The colonel really liked him. The colonel was in his late 40s, and we had a young Henry Ford in his 20s. He really liked him. He was looking for an heir, but Henry Ford was more interested in the internal combustion engine. The Colonel Pope felt that they were dirty, polluting, and noisy. And here we are, nearly 125 years later, talking about the emergence of the electric vehicle. One of the things you're seeing here is actually a picture probably of the first and only presidential motorcade in an electric vehicle, and that happened in downtown Hartford in the early 1900s. So Connecticut's got an important legacy when it comes to the electric vehicles as a technology. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So we are working really, really closely with our partners at DEEP, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, which have an EV Connecticut program. You'll see this throughout the state of Connecticut, where they've supported a number of electric vehicle recharging stations to help consumers see that they are available and to reduce range anxiety. They've done an excellent job getting EV rechargers out and about throughout Connecticut, and they also oversee an incentive program called the Cheaper program that provides rebates through local auto retailers for hybrid hybrid vehicles and electric vehicles, as well as fuel cell vehicles. So take a look at that website if you're interested in an EV. There are incentives available through DEEP's Cheaper program. Next slide. So as we were starting to get to think about what role the Connecticut Green Bank would play in the alternative fuel vehicle space, we started off with hiring one of the experts in the space, so Nick Nigro from Atlas Consulting. He helped us think about what the market potential was for alternative fuel vehicles in Connecticut. You should check out this report. We took a look at this market from a cleaner, cheaper, and more reliable perspective. That's kind of Connecticut's energy policy overall. I've mentioned that alternative fuel vehicles and associated infrastructure fall into our clean energy definition. And I think the takeaway of the report really was that it was important for the state to focus on light-duty vehicles and the electrification of those vehicles. And we're seeing that now as the state looks at its climate strategy and the #1 emitting sector in Connecticut being transportation. So how we move to decarbonize our transportation sector is going to determine how Connecticut implements successfully its climate change strategy. So those are some of the foundations of our EV program, and I'll transition this over to Bert to talk about how we're going to dig into the numbers and think about
Thanks, BG. I just wanted to say that continuing on the work that we did with Nick Nigro and Atlas Public Policy, together with Atlas, the Green Bank developed something that would help municipalities around the state figure out how they could get started on some of these programs, like adding in EV rechargers or encouraging shared use mobility programs within the state. So together we came up with a concept for a transportation electrification toolkit, and it's just you need to go to the link, and I guess there'll be a link that will be supplied when these when the deck becomes available for your viewing. But you really need to take a look at that because it's crammed full of lots of information that you'd find very interesting, such as where Ubers and Zip cars are located by zip code throughout the state, where DC fast charging and level 2 charging stations are located. But we also wanted to have insight into where, say, low-income households are concentrated, and populations of cities with limited access to vehicles, so that we can could help these municipalities say that, well, we clearly have citizens who would benefit from shared use mobility access, whether it's shared use or ride-hailing services, and so and also would see which of the other towns around the state actually have these programs up and running, so they could touch base with the leadership in those towns and get an idea of how well those programs are running, whether they're actually delivering on the promise and service for access to mobility that was promised by the providers, and how they might be improved in the future. So I recommend you take a look at that, and that's just one of the deliverables that came from the result of our work with Atlas. Next slide, please. And as I've mentioned earlier in the program today, Connecticut has a very comprehensive energy policy that makes possible a lot of developments that the Green Bank is working on. This legislative session has been no exception. The legislature passed Public Act 1769, which is a policy for testing autonomous vehicles. So don't get concerned, you're not going to find an autonomous vehicle running down the street after you, but this does establish a pilot program that allows manufacturers and fleet service providers to test fully autonomous vehicles in up to 4 municipalities throughout the state. So there'll be a process whereby municipalities will apply into the program and will be selected, and that would then work together to establish requirements for testing under the program, and there would be various agreements that would be entered into by the municipalities with autonomous vehicle testers. And we wouldn't be government if we didn't establish a task force. So this policy actually requires that a 15-member task force be established to develop legislative recommendations for regulating AVs, of course, because there are certain safety aspects that you can imagine from vehicles that do not have a driver. So that's actually coming down the pike, and so we would look for those 4 municipalities to be selected over the next year. Let's see, I think we're going over to you, Laura, next.
Yep, thanks, Bert. I wanted to give a bit of detail on a program that we're working on now, specifically with Nissan, in a campaign to bring down the cost of Nissan Leaf vehicles. This is based upon the idea of bulk or group purchases, such as the Solarize campaign. And in this, we designate a virtual fleet via purchases amongst specific user groups. Currently, there are employees of participating municipalities that are able to make use of this program. We've made it available to state employees as well. And there's additional, I direct everyone, if they're interested in more information, to go to our website on the link that's available on this slide to check out additional details. What we've been able to do is work with Nissan to provide an incentive of $10,000 off of the Leaf. There's the state incentive that Bryan spoke about earlier, available through our Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, called Cheaper, where you can get $3,000 of incentive off the cost of the car. That's actually shifting down to $2,000 later this month. And then there's the federal tax credit, which can provide up to $7,500 off of the cost. All of this added up can bring down the cost, can actually cut the cost of the vehicle almost in half, depending on the tax liability available. So we're quite happy with that. And again, I invite everyone to check out the website for more detail. I know we've focused on EV cars in these previous slides, but next slide. I wanted to touch upon the other component of EVs, which is really the infrastructure or the chargers. They're also an important consideration to help increase adoption of EVs within the state. And because of that, we are exploring various business models and financing opportunities for chargers, both for cars or light-duty vehicles as well as for buses. I'll get into the detail of one of these initiatives, and it's actually the development of a carbon credit offset methodology that we are working on in partnership with a small coalition of interested parties. This includes the Audi Volkswagen Group, Exelon, which is a utility, EVgo, which is a EV charger infrastructure company, Siemens, and the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, as well as the Climate Neutral Business Network. What we're doing is we are helping to finance the creation of an offset methodology that would be available under the voluntary carbon standard and available to any owner of an EV charger to help monetize, to help get carbon offset credits issued from the usage of the charger, which then can be sold into the voluntary market for an additional revenue. I'm going to turn the speaker over to my colleague Diego, who has been working on this project, and have him discuss in a bit more detail how the methodology actually works.
Thanks, Laura. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we go into the carbon credit methodology. The methodology let us determine the number of carbon credits that an electric vehicle charging station can earn. And this methodology can be, as we tell in the slide, it can be calculated through a two-step formula. On the left side of the slide, we estimate first how many miles an EV can drive. We can determine this number by measuring the electricity that flows from the electric vehicle charging station into the EV. And using the EV range, we can further know how many miles the EV can be driven by the electricity that flows into the vehicle. And once we know how many miles the EV can drive and its emission, we can then compare it to an equivalent fuel car, which will allow us to determine the total CO2 displaced that would take place by switching from fuel cars to electric vehicles. Once we have that number, we move to the right side of the equation, and we subtract the emissions that are emitted from generating the electricity that will be transmitted from the electricity grid into the electric vehicle charging station. And finally, one carbon credit is assigned by each ton of CO2 that is reduced from switching to electric vehicles. Next slide, please. And in this next slide, which is actually the final slide from the financial innovation portion of this presentation, we explain what the Connecticut Green Bank role could be once we have the methodology in place. We foresee that the Green Bank can play the role of an aggregator, given that, number one, EV charging station owners may not be aware of this methodology, and two, the Green Bank can achieve economies of scale through this aggregation role. The role can be divided into a four-step, as it can be seen in this slide. First, the Green Bank obtains the right from the EV charger owners to process the carbon credits on their behalf. Second, the Green Bank goes through the process of obtaining these carbon credits for the EV charger owners. Third, the Green Bank sells the carbon credits into the voluntary carbon credit market that Laura was mentioning. And fourth and finally, the Green Bank charges an aggregator fee and transfers the remaining revenues back to the charging station owners. During this process, the charging station owners get an additional revenue stream at no upfront cost, while the Green Bank seeks to achieve our objective of promoting more electric vehicle charging stations in the state of Connecticut. I'll pass it on now to Bryan, who will share other news.
Great. Thank you, Diego. So it's great to see the finance team looking and applying environmental markets to clean energy deployment. So we've taken a look at green bonds, and we can see how the long-term life of the run-of-river hydro can benefit from low-interest, long-term financing through a PPA structure with the town of Meriden. So very, very, very exciting to see that and how that works with the federal CREBS program. And then on the innovative side here on the carbon offset, how to try to value the societal benefits of reduced greenhouse gas emissions through electric vehicles. Really, really exciting. So good to see the team looking at environmental markets as a key component to help us monetize the value of what green energy is bringing to the marketplace. So just wrapping up here real quick. So just in terms of what happened this legislative session, as we continue to report out every year, we continuously make slight improvements to our CPACE legislation. I think the big piece that came out this year is clarifications on new construction. So you can expect us to develop some guidelines and send those out for public comment on how we might finance through CPACE new construction, green energy improvements on new construction. There was an extension of the ZREC LREC program for 2 years, for 1 year. So it's great to see that beyond this coming year. We'll see another year. And we're also seeing DEEP have the authority to procure through long-term contracts energy and renewable energy credits for large projects, fuel cells, offshore wind, anaerobic digesters. So legislature was very supportive of those procurements. Solar siting, anaerobic digesters, we've seen the virtual net metering program open up a bit more for the agricultural segment, specifically as it applies to anaerobic digesters. So farm waste to energy, we expect to see more projects with. And then overall on the budget, everyone's still focused very much on what's happening with the state budget. State's got a $40 billion 2-year budget and a $5 billion deficit that they're working through. The expectation is that within the coming weeks or months that the state will pass a budget, and obviously the Connecticut Green Bank, the Connecticut Energy Efficiency Fund are very much focused on ensuring that the ratepayer resources going into the green economy stay in the green economy, recognizing that our legislators have really, really tough choices ahead of them. So stay tuned on the state budget. Next slide. Real quick report out on our board and governance structure. Norma Glover has retired. Norma has had a long career in clean energy, from being the chair of the CARB in California, the Clean Air Resources Board, to being the chair of our predecessor, the Connecticut Clean Energy Fund. We celebrated with Norma a few weeks back the future of clean energy in Connecticut, an event we organized at Yale that included Dan Haar of the Hartford Current, who moderated a great panel on the future of clean energy. So really just want to celebrate Norma's career in clean energy and her voluntary support of Connecticut's efforts to deploy green energy in our state. And Gina McCarthy has joined our board. She is appointed by Governor Malloy. She is filling Moon Choi's position. Moon Choi was the provost of UConn. He's now the president of the Missouri College and University System. We were excited that Gina is coming home. Gina was the commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection, a leader and overseer of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and a number of efforts in our state to advance climate protection. So we are completely excited to have Gina back with us as the governor's appointment on the board of the Connecticut Green Bank. Okay, and I think that we've got one last kind of set of slides here. Yeah, so just kind of wrapping up here. So the Connecticut Green Bank was nominated by the Coalition for Green Capital into Harvard's annual Innovations in American Government Awards program. I can tell you this is a really, really extensive process. CGC nominated us about a year ago. We went through a multi-step process of essays and questions that really forced us to think about what we do and how we do it. resulting in an evaluation of our program, along with visits to supporters and those who may have questions about the Green Bank model. So it was really, really evaluated. And what you're seeing here are pictures of the finals. So over 500 nominations went into the program, and there were 11 finalists that competed at the Kennedy School for the Ash Center Award. We presented in front of a panel of 5 senior leaders, including the chair, Kathleen Townsend Kennedy, and a number of others. And what you're seeing here are photos of our colleagues, some of them in that moment that Carrie and I felt when we were presented, that moment of kind of horror and stress of it. You can imagine this is kind of a Shark Tank environment. It's very, very stressful, and you're presenting to a group of really, really important people, and you're trying to convince them that your innovation is important. And all of the innovations that reached the finals were very, very important. We saw things like pre-K education with New York City, the delivery of Narcan to address the opioid addiction in Quincy, to crowdfunding economic development in Michigan, crowdsourcing science in the federal government. So a number of things, redistricting in California. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So yeah, go ahead and click it one more time. So in the end, the Connecticut Green Bank won the Innovations in American Government Award. We were very excited and honored to receive that. As you could imagine, you know, the results and impacts that we're making in Connecticut, we believe every city, state, and country should be achieving as well. And we feel a real responsibility now in terms of being an educator and espousing the Green Bank model. We not only win this recognition from the Ash Center, but we also win a $100,000 prize. We're going to be devoting that prize to the Green Bank Academy that will help educate other green banks and help others think about creating green banks. Our board is matching that $100,000 with an additional $100,000, again, trying to help ensure that this model is built and practiced across the country and throughout the world. So a really, really exciting moment for the state of Connecticut, and we celebrated that about 2 weeks ago, receiving that award from Harvard. One more slide. So, you know, when you look at others who have won this award in the past, this is an award that's given to government innovation across the spectrum. So not only energy and environment, but also education and healthcare and the like. The state of Vermont, for its energy efficiency utility, won this award back in 2003, and we all know how important that model has been in terms of spreading efficiency across this country, even to adapting the model to a sustainable energy utility in Washington, D.C. The city of Seattle won it in 2007 for creating the Climate Protection Agreement through the U.S. Conference of Mayors. So when we think about what's happening now in the U.S. in terms of subnational leadership on climate change, all our local cities are now signing on to this agreement to support, to address the 2-degree Celsius target that came out of Paris. So we feel there's an anxiety and a burden to be able to live up to these past winners and the expectations of their models growing as they have. But I think our team relishes, wants to continue to promote what we're doing across the country and throughout the world. And I think what we're going to do is probably wrap it up with the video here. Go to the next slide, and I'll just tee it up. So we, in our final remarks to the panel at Harvard, we came up with a message. We didn't want to talk about what we do and how we do it. We wanted to talk about why we do it. So we focused on this message of inclusive prosperity, which is ensuring that the climate economy, the green economy, is available for all. And we really were inspired by this message through Washington, D.C. Mayor Bowser, and it formed the foundation to our remarks. And what we're going to show here is really a montage that we showed at our recent award ceremony in Hartford. So let's go ahead and run it.
We believe that everything we do to help people thrive and businesses grow. We do it in the interest of achieving inclusive prosperity.
citizens. High energy costs are forcing them to trade up paying utilities, things like food, medicine, or housing.
Our model applied in New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Montgomery County, Maryland. Creating the nation's first green bank of that personal vision of Connecticut's political years. Throughout our journey, our true purpose continues to reveal itself. We've come to appreciate that we innovate to transform lives. In our eyes, the ultimate measure of success for Green Bank will be how well we address the objective challenge of providing society a gateway to inclusive prosperity.
Great. So thank you for that. So those were actually pieces of our final remarks to Harvard, and we are all, everyone on this call is focused on ensuring that this green economy that we're building is available to everybody, and our team is so driven to that end. Working with all of you to bring it to consumers is very important to all of us. So I think we'll leave it at that, and we'll see if there are any questions, Ed, that we have from our audience.
Yep. So we have 2 questions so far. So I encourage anyone else, if you have a question, now's the time to ask it. So the first one for the finance team. So the Meriden Hydro project, 2 questions. So how long did the overall process to get from design and permitting? And how long did the overall process take to get the financing, and which was more challenging?
Both. From design to permitting, that was, I'll give you a rough idea, Ed. I think it was roughly 2 years, 2.5 years, although the project development process really went back to I guess it was the Clean Energy Fund back in I'm looking at Bryan, 2012, and where it benefited from an operational demonstration loan, and so or
op demo loan.
Yeah. Op demo loan. So I came just in 2012, so it was like at the beginning of my tenure. So really it dates back to that point in time where they went about first of all proving to the Clean Energy Fund that it was worthy of support, and then went through the process of finding a good site for this GRU, which ultimately ended up being in Meriden, and working with the city for development. As far as the financing, so really all the way from 2012 to 2017 when it finally got finished, so a 5-year process. The next GRU won't take nearly. As far as the process with FERC, though, I do want to point out, part of the innovation here was to try to come up with a process that would be faster with FERC, because the permitting for regular hydroelectric facilities can take much longer. 3, 4, 5 years. This process, I believe, was 18 months, and in conversations with FERC, they think they can get it down to less than a year, so which is really fast. So a number of these can be developed rapidly, which gets to the cookie cutter nature of what we're trying to do. The financing itself, we started in January of 2016, and we drew on the bonds in February of 17, so just slightly over a year.
Okay. Thanks. So next question, could someone discuss the carbon credit market that the EVCCC would be sold into, the who, what, when, and how?
The carbon credit market, there are actually plenty of carbon credit markets in Europe. Some of them are voluntary, some of them are regulated and enforced by the different governments. Here in the U.S., however, and the one particularly that we would focus on is a voluntary carbon credit market. This markets are basically different companies that are interested in acquiring these carbon credits, mostly for public relations reasons, PR reasons. We would solve into those. Those markets already exist. There are a couple of examples. Recently, GM actually participated in this market, acquiring, I can't remember the number of I don't know if you can
dollars. I think 30 million or $40 million worth of the voluntary credits from energy efficiency from college campuses.
Exactly. So I mean, that would be the market we would be aiming. And whenever the methodology is ready, we're hoping that the methodology can be ready at the end of this year. So we would be acquiring these carbon credits next year for the different electric vehicle charging stations in the States and across the U.S.
And who would be participating in that?
Actually, anyone can participate in the carbon credit market. Once the methodology is in place, any EV charger station can participate in the market, and anyone willing to acquire those can buy the carbon credits once they're issued.
Okay, thanks. And it looks like the last question here is the project team exploring a methodology to generate carbon credits for traditional energy efficiency projects?
So it's an interesting question. This is Bryan. We haven't looked at efficiency, and I would say that when we look at efficiency here in Connecticut, that those environmental attributes really reside with the incentive and rebate programs that are offered through the Connecticut Energy Efficiency Fund. But one could think about these new markets in terms of renewable heating and cooling, where there don't exist, where incentives and rebates are very limited, and there's a state interest in wanting to see thermal emissions from heating oil be addressed, where something like a voluntary carbon standard that's developed for EVs can be developed for renewable heating and cooling. We haven't gotten there yet, thinking about it. There are other policy approaches. I think the Comprehensive Energy Strategy, the draft CES, is proposing a heating oil fund. We've seen other states propose the creation of a thermal renewable energy credit through an RPS standard. So there are a variety of ways of looking at it, and we are taking a look at it because we know we want to see more renewable heating and cooling deployed throughout Connecticut. So stay tuned. Whether or not that's a carbon offset methodology that we develop or we see it in a compliance market, hopefully there'll be something, some sort of incentive to be able to support renewable heating and cooling.
All right. Thanks, Bryan. And with that was our last question. If anyone has any further questions, feel free to email them, and we will be providing a copy of the slide deck and the webinar recording sometime next week, so keep an eye out for that. And with that, thank you everyone for joining, and have a good day.